So this week, I was speaking to a coach about improving decision making, especially as teams get late in the season and have to play better, more athletic, better coached teams late in the playoffs. And so one of the questions that I asked the coach is, how many decisions do your players make in, let's say, the first 45 minutes to an hour of practice? And after reflection, the coach said, we do some hard drills, but probably not a lot of decision making. And I think this is an important point that is only now starting to make into kind of the popular press. So for me, I try to have decision making throughout a practice. For instance, this week I did a skills session with a fifth or sixth grade basketball team, and we started out playing 2-on-2 rugby. Then we did 3-on-3 no dribble. So every drill that we were doing, which was based on skill development, there was decision making the whole time. Whereas a lot of practices that I see, coaches kind of gradually get into practice. So we might start out with 3-man weave to begin, and then maybe we go to more or less pregame layup drill where there's no defense. Maybe we do a shell drill, but it's a very controlled shell drill, so there's really not a lot of decision making in the shell drill. We might be working really hard, but players are going to predetermined spots at predetermined points, and the offense is basically just passing the ball, and they're not trying to make a play or anything. So there's no real decision making involved. So we're now half hour, 45 minutes into practice, and nobody's made a decision. Everything's kind of just memorized or executing a physical skill. So then we get in games, and we have to make decisions right from the beginning. And it's decisions. And so then we get late in games and we make mistakes. So there's some studies out recently that suggest if during physical training, so the studies looked at cycling on an exercise bike, and one group just cycled, the other group cycled and had to solve problems like on a computer at the same time. And so then after the training period was done, they did a post-test, and the ones who just did the physical training, they improved physiologically by measure of how long they could go at 80% of their VO2 max. And then the second group that was solving hard problems during their training, they improved like triple as much as the first group. And so because they had, quote unquote, the harder training, they were solving problems during their exercise. When that hard part or the problem solving was taken away, the training seemed easier, the exercise seemed easier, they could go longer at the same intensity. So if you kind of extrapolate and change things a little bit, which is dangerous because you can't always do that, so I would not, as Kiki Vandeweghe said yesterday, said this is scientifically proven. But the idea being, if you practice your physiology, essentially, so you're working really hard, in the shell drill, you're working really hard in your 3-man weaves, you're getting a lot of running, a lot of exercise, you're improving cardiovascularly, but then you're put into a more stressful situation. Will your training, will your fitness transfer to that more complex, more decision-making environment, more stressful environment, versus compared to a team that's trained in stressful environments where they're constantly making decisions throughout practice. And so I think when we look at fatigue in players, we often focus on physical fatigue. Oh, well, their legs are gone, they've played so many games in so many days, blah, blah, blah. I think there's an argument to be made that the fatigue is actually as much mental as it is physical, and the mental stress of a game, the constant decision making, the complexity of the game, the pressure of the game, being in an environment with fans, with people yelling, etc., adds stress. And that stress then can lead to fatigue. And the fatigue is as mental as much as it is physical. And so players make poor decisions, and we blame it on fitness. Their legs are tired, something that you hear. But I think instead we need to think about it in terms of mental fatigue, at least in part. And so to prepare players to make better decisions when they're mentally fatigued, we need to increase the amount of decision making, and complexity in practice. And so if players are accustomed to spending a 2-hour practice where they're making decisions the entire time, I think they'll be better prepared for a game than if they are practice really hard physically, physiologically, and develop great cardiovascular fitness, but maybe don't have to make decisions except maybe, for the last 15 or 20 minutes of practice. I don't know that will prepare a player for the mental fatigue and the mental stress of training, as well as a 2-hour practice where there's constant decision making and constant complexity. So again, this is one thing to think about when you're designing practices is one of the problems, signs of fatigue late in the game, turnovers late in the game, poor fouls late in the game. And could these be more due to mental fatigue than the physical fatigue? Is it a matter of increasing the amount of decision making in practice as opposed to trying to make practice harder? Again, there's the difference between complexity and hard. So you can make a practice really hard by making the players run a lot, but it doesn't necessarily make it complex, and it doesn't necessarily tax the brain in the same way that playing a small-sided scrimmage, which may not be quite as physical as running sprints for an hour, but adds that mental fatigue from having to make constant decisions and make the right play over and over and over and over again. Not to mention that the more that you make these decisions, not only does it help to make you impervious to the mental fatigue, but if you make 100 decisions in practice versus making 20 decisions in practice, you're probably going to get better at your decision making. And so that's probably going to transfer better to a game situation. So again, just changing the way that we look at things, and typically we look at things from a physical standpoint, and I think maybe looking at fatigue from a mental standpoint could have some strong benefits in terms of skill development and preparing teams, especially when they play the better teams, the faster teams, and deep into the playoffs.